Yes, I'm David. I do have AIDS, but I'm also living.
I know that the spirit lives on after death, and that's not good enough for me. I want a flesh and blood son, and this won't do. This will not do.
I find that, through any crisis, it's mostly important to keep your sense of humor.
The baby came to us in poor health. Her health is really failing now, and she's a very sick baby.
Good evening. I'm Lynn May. Welcome to tonight's town meeting, Living with AIDS. Before we get started, I want to share an experience with you. While working on this program, I met a young woman who has AIDS. Kathy was infected by her boyfriend. And it struck me that if I had met her on the street, I would never have thought she had AIDS. She could be anyone, a co-worker, someone I go to church with, a good friend. In fact, the more people I've met while working on this program, the more I realized that AIDS really can happen to anyone. Tonight we are going to meet Kathy, and we also will hear 3 other personal stories. And we will hear from people who live and work with AIDS every day in our schools, at work, in church, in our community. We would like those of you at home to join in tonight's discussion. For the next 90 minutes, you can call us right here in the studio at area code 703-845-9797 with your questions and, of course, your comments. The first story is about a young man named David.
I have hopes and aspirations and dreams. Just because I'm 18 and have AIDS doesn't necessarily mean I'm not thinking about my future, because I am.
When he was a little boy, David was enchanted with the world of theater.
I was doing a lot with Children's Theatre of Arlington, doing quite a few productions at school.
At age 15, he got a role with the Joffrey Ballet.
I got a little part, running across the stage. And I was sort of amazed and enthralled by this wonderful world and the dancing, and it was just so beautiful.
His biggest fan was his mother, Nancy.
It was wonderful, and he was so excited. We were all so excited. I was so proud of him when we went that I felt like poking the person next to me and telling, that's my son up there.
The theater opened up a new world for David, including an acceptance of his homosexuality, a topic not discussed at home.
We didn't talk about sexual orientation as David was growing up. Sometimes we wondered because he seemed to have a lot of feminine interests.
From an early age, David knew he was gay, yet his mother was reluctant to talk about it.
It was something that I was afraid of. I wondered sometimes, but it was something I didn't want to think about. I think probably every mother wants her child to be absolutely normal.
Homosexuality is not something that's necessarily openly discussed. I did not find any support while I was in Yorktown for me in terms of being gay and who can I talk to.
David attended Yorktown High School in Arlington, Virginia from 1984 to 1987. Not only was homosexuality not discussed, but AIDS was a distant issue and not part of the school curriculum.
We were still thinking of AIDS as something that our generation did not have to deal with. I mean, freshmen and sophomores in high school. I mean, when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, or even 20, 21, I mean, your head is full of all sorts of dreams and ideas and where you're going to go and applying to college and applying to schools. And why and how can someone stop and think about AIDS and how it's affecting their life? I mean, people don't.
In the summer of 1988, David was at home, preparing to go away to college.
I found him on the couch downstairs, and he said, I don't think I'm going to go today. I just don't feel well. I'm tired.
The next morning I woke up and had a temperature about 103, and that lasted for about 2 weeks.
I finally did bring him into the doctor's.
In the back of my mind, certainly I was aware of the possibilities and afraid of the possibilities.
He looked at him and thought maybe it was mono, and did some blood work. Eventually, the blood work came back, and he said it was hepatitis.
I was his first AIDS patient, and he had no idea what it was.
I said, David, I think you need to go get tested for HIV. And he said, yes, I know, I do.
I did, and it came back antibody positive.
I cried a whole lot. I know that the spirit lives on after death, and that's not good enough for me. I want a flesh and blood son, and this won't do. This will not do. I feel there's a feeling that our two hearts have been connected, and as this has come about, I have felt actually feeling like my heart was breaking. I mean, it really felt like my heart was breaking.
With the love and support of his parents, David moved into his own apartment after he regained his strength. He now takes courses at the Corcoran and works part-time at the National Lesbian and Gay Health Foundation.
B. Roman's a wonderful lady. She knows where AIDS has been, and I mean, she's been dealing with AIDS for 8 years.
B. Roman is the executive director of the National Lesbian and Gay Health Foundation.
People with AIDS have taught me a hell of a lot. From day one, I've taken the time and the patience to teach me what their fight was all about. I've said goodbye to 230 people, men and women, that I've loved very deeply. And they've all taught me something. And what happens to you is that you become a catalyst for the knowledge. And hopefully pass it on to someone else. What is that on your neck? What is it? Come here.
Well, I told you, over here. And they're behind the ears, and they're in the armpits, and in the groin, and all over. And these red dots, I mean, I have them on my legs and stuff, and I don't know what that is.
What you have to remember, what you said to me was, all these little things happen. None of them are little things anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like a zit.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So you need to make notes to yourself.
Right.
This is what you need to ask the doctor.
Right.
And each time you ask which are the medications, are these side effects?
Right.
Do these have any ramifications
Right.
from the medication I'm taking?
Right.
It hurts you to walk.
Yeah, well, I mean...
David teaches by sharing what's happening to his body and his life with us. What do I teach him? The most important thing, I think, is how to enjoy the quality of life and do something with that life. Not sit back and wait to die. We're all going to die. It's what you do with that lifespan, whether it's 3 weeks, 3 months, hopefully now, 7, 8, 10 years. It's doing something with it.
I have a question for you all. Who here has ever met somebody with AIDS? All right. I'm 18 years old, and I was diagnosed with AIDS this summer. I had CMV. One of the things I want to say to people, or I want to reach people, and target my peer group, and target the young audiences, and help them and sensitize the issue of AIDS, and maybe help them understand that, look guys, it's out there, you know, and we're all affected by it. And I mean,
David is reaching out by talking to schools in the Washington area. In March, he spoke to students at St. Mary's College in Maryland.
It's scary.
I want David to live his life. I want him to know about feeling alive.
You just sort of pick up.
I want him to know about loving and being loved. I'd ask that he continue to have what he does have, which is good people in his life and a sense of meaning and purpose. And he seems to know how to get that. And so I hope he has more of the same.
We would like to know what you thought about David's story. Please call us at 845-9797 with your comments and questions. Let me share with you what I thought when I first saw it. I felt that David could be my son. Of course, he could be any of our sons, and it's one of the issues we have to come to grips with. His story is more than just a teenager with AIDS. It's also about how we deal as parents with talking to our children about sex. And I have a question I'm going to ask some members of the audience in just a minute, but first I would like to begin with one of our 6 panelists and welcome Mary Lee Tatum, who is a sex and AIDS educator in the Falls Church Public Schools. What is our problem as parents, as educators, with talking about sex, with talking about AIDS? Where do we get bogged down?
We get bogged down for forever in this country with that question, Lynn. In a kinder, gentler nation, one would hope that from a very early age, that naturalness that is our maleness and our femaleness would be easily talked about within families and within schools and within religious communities, so that all children, regardless of sexual orientation, would have someone, many people, to talk with and to talk openly about their fears, their feelings, and the wonderfulnesses of their own sexuality.
But in a perfect world it would work that way, wouldn't it? And I don't think it does in reality. And I'd like to go to Bill McCormick. And I assume you identified to some extent with David. And let me tell our audience who Bill is. Bill is a volunteer in the Montgomery County AIDS program, and it offers support for people with AIDS. And would you share a little bit about your background and what kinds of things you learned when you were David's age?
When I was David's age, I didn't learn basically anything education-wise on AIDS. It actually took much longer. I'm much older than David, where the problem wasn't occurring at that time. I never experienced the AIDS issue until, I would say, latter part of the 70s, when everyone else...
But what about just talking about sexuality in school? I mean, was
Sexuality was a topic that 12, 13 years ago, when I graduated from high school, wasn't discussed. It was something that was not brought up. I'm from upstate New York in a small town. And
they don't talk about
that. No, we did have a health class, but that was the extent of it.
Wait, let me stop you because our audience finds that amusing. How many of us had health? How many of us learned anything about sex in health class? There are a couple of people over here, and I want to know what they learned. Maybe we can find something out here. All right, now you had in high school a health class. Please stand up right here. All right. What were you taught about sex in your health class? Where did this happen?
Well, I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I attended an all-girls private school, and it was a small school, so we had a lot of personal attention and a lot about women's bodies and puberty and things like that, and there was a lot of free speech about sexual activity, and it was a very liberal school. So,
were you comfortable in your class learning?
Very comfortable.
Do you think it was affected by the fact that it was all girls?
Yes, I think it made it much easier because without a mixed audience, you're not as inhibited. And we were really encouraged to talk and ask questions and share, and our teachers were very open, and it was very comfortable. I was very, very fortunate.
Mary Lee, how common an experience is this?
I'd say it's quite uncommon. That most schools have a very difficult time putting comprehensive family life sex education programs in because there's some mystical belief that if you talk to young people about sexuality, there's an it that they will try. And It's not. It's instead of that wonderful sense of who you are.
Dr. Tuxen, in talking about that it, and I should say Dr. Reed Tuxen almost needs no introduction. He's on television as much as anybody in this city. He is, of course, as we know, Commissioner of Public Health for the District of Columbia. In talking about that it, do you run across parents who say to you, look, I don't want my kids to learn about it in school. I want them to learn about it from their doctor?
We have a large number of people who just don't want it to be talked about at all, whether it's in school or from their doctor or from anyone. That there's the ostrich syndrome. If I just put my head in the sand, it'll just all go away. There are a lot of people who just leave it up in the air and just assume that somebody else will talk about it. And so there's, in too many cases, a great burden that falls on the state, on the city, to assume the responsibility of parenting. It would be much easier for all of us if we as parents would accept our responsibility, first of all, to get comfortable with the issues of sexuality our own selves, and then secondly, get comfortable enough in talking to our young people and the people that we're responsible for about these very important issues. It's like if you can't talk about it now, it's much more difficult to talk about to somebody when they have either a sexually transmitted disease, the disease AIDS, or being pregnant. So.
Before we take our first phone call, I'm looking for a volunteer here, someone who is a parent who, as I have, has gone through those years of trying to talk to your children about sex. Would anyone like to tell me about a successful experience that you were able to do? I'm going to be real disappointed if nobody raises their hand. All right, we have two people. Please, sir, stand.
First of all, I'd like to disagree on the ostrich syndrome. My boy was 6, my other girl was 8, and my oldest girl was 11. And my wife and myself have very openly talked with them about sexuality and about AIDS and the whole relationship. And the fact that I don't want it done in a public school doesn't make me an ostrich. It makes me a parent who wants to assume responsibility for my children.
You're willing to assume that responsibility?
Oh, yes, definitely. It's my place to do so.
You don't want it talked about in the public schools, though?
Well, my children don't attend a public school, so I can't really answer for that. I would say that for my children, the place is in the home, where we teach them their morality, we teach them and bring them up.
All right, thank you. All right, fine, then we'll take our call.
I just want to make sure you understand. I'm not suggesting that that it has to be done in the public environment. I'm saying the ostrich syndrome that we see too often are those parents who don't do it at home, don't do anything, and just leave it alone. And then the children wind up going out in the streets, and that's where they learn it, and or they don't learn it, and that's the problem.
All right, before Mary Lee's got her finger up there, I'm going to ask you to hold your thought while we say good evening to Alex from Alexandria. Your question, please, or your comment.
Hi.
Hi.
Without sounding flippant or crass, it seems absolutely shocking that an 18-year-old can come down with AIDS. I was just wondering, did this person lead a promiscuous lifestyle, or was this just by chance, like, the first time that he had had sex?
All right, who hissed? Wait, excuse me. The hissers are going to respond. Would you please stand? All right.
Well, I hiss because I think it's really clear that we need to make it obvious to everyone that it doesn't matter whether you're promiscuous or not, and it doesn't matter if he had sex 1 time or 10 times. And the point is really that we need to talk about the behaviors that people can get AIDS from. And I'd like to ask a specific question of a panelist. Dr. Tuxen, I'd like to ask you about why we have not instituted educational programs in the public schools in D.C. that are sexually explicit and pro-gay.
Well, first of all, let me say that there is well, let me get the applause. Jackie Sadler is in the audience here, who is in fact responsible for doing designing the education programs for the D.C. public schools. And I think there's certainly no more creative or informed person doing that work than Ms. Sadler.
Then let's let Jackie speak, please. Come on. Oh, she's very reluctantly, getting...
Well, in D.C. public schools, we have AIDS education mandated from grades 4 through 12. Of course, now, in terms of sexual orientation, since 1979, we have been able to discuss homosexuality, methods of contraception, so the full gamut. But now, how comfortable a teacher feels teaching the subject, of course, is an individual variable. But we are offering training, and we have a very close relationship, and we refer our students to SMILE. That's the Sexual Minority Youth Assistance League. So we are doing all that we think we can, but of course there still is more we know that needs to be done. We try to work with our parents, we try to work with teachers, and we try to work with the community and the churches. Of course.
Much
no,
resistance. Do you get much resistance when you say you try to work with them? Do you often have people come to you and say, I'm sorry, no explicit language?
Okay. On the elementary level, parental consent is required. Junior and senior high school, parental consent is not required. So there's no resistance because it's taught, okay? But parents can opt to have their children not included in sex education and AIDS education on the elementary level.
Do many make that choice?
Very few.
All right. I don't know whether that satisfies the hissers. Anybody else want to make a comment? All right, let me go up here. Let's ask, we're going to talk to a lady who is, I think, a mother. Can you stand, please?
And I wanted to comment about the discussion about family life education in the school or at home, and they're complementary. You asked about circumstances that make it easier. A good family life education course encourages communication at home and makes it easier for parents, and most parents do find it difficult. So that a good family life education course helps parents emphasize their values. It sends the kids home to talk about issues. You talk about other things besides football at the dinner table when your child is taking a good family life education course. And we found that has been very, very valuable.
Ms. Tatum, the ideal obviously would be a combination. I see Jim Graham lifting his hand. Please, would you comment?
I just wanted to add something, which is that, there's a very important statistic here, that the average length of time between point of infection and a full-blown case of AIDS, we now know is more than 7 years, a length of time that seems to get extended with every new year of knowledge, which means that many of the cases of AIDS that we're seeing in D.C. and the D.C. area, which are men and women in their low 20s, are people who could have been infected during their high school years. And what that does is to really underscore the need for these programs in the schools, because previously we thought, well, gosh, this is really happening to people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s. That's not the case. It's happening at high school level.
We should tell you people that Jim Graham is the administrator of the Whitman Walker Clinic, where you offer a variety of kinds of support, including medical support, I believe. Mary
Lynn, and AIDS education needs to be in the context of comprehensive sex education. We can't plop in 3 days at 3 grade levels about the dangers of the virus, because we've been doing that with STD education for 50 years, and it has been singularly ineffective in this country in terms of stemming the epidemic. The time has come for Americans to put their focus on what is happening in the world. And to the gentleman who said he thinks that this belongs in the home, which I do too, because it is in the home, for better or for worse. There's not much we can do about attitudes and values. Some of them I would like to change, believe me. But in the schools is where his kid is going to hear more about human sexuality than he has in 1 talk or 10 talks with his parents at home. And that kind of education we want to have some direction for, instead of letting it happen in the locker room and at slumber parties.
An important point, and I think perhaps this is also the time that we should say that AIDS is not just something that happens to gay white men. If it were, we would not have stories like Kathy's.
Because people don't believe that everyone gets AIDS. I'm living proof I'm not a gay white male. I look like the girl next door who lives in the apartment down the hallway or whatever else. I look like anybody.
Kathy could be anybody. Raised in a small town in a middle-class family, Kathy dreamed of having it all.
Good job, 2.2 family, pretty much the standard dream. It'd be nice to have a Learjet in the backyard too, but, just a life like I had known when I'd grown up. I would like to have, given that to children.
Kathy thought that she would share that life with the boy next door.
We knew each other, and we had the same friends. He was a few years older than I was, and he had grown up there all his life.
Yet when her boyfriend would not commit to a long-term relationship, she broke it off and left home to pursue a career in Washington, D.C. Kathy soon learned that her boyfriend was ill.
His best friend, who was also my friend, called me up and tried to convince me that he thought he had AIDS, and I kept saying, no way. We didn't know that he was bisexual, so I didn't believe it, and plus it's very hard to believe something like that because of the implications to yourself.
No one had any idea he was bisexual?
None. I assume that he felt that he'd be ostracized by the community, that he might be shunned in his job, everything. When he did get his diagnosis, he didn't tell anybody, and he didn't seek any treatments. I think he was afraid that his bisexuality would come out and that here he's got this dreaded disease, and he was afraid. He died that weekend, and I went in and got tested, and it came out positive. I think I just went into shock.
Kathy immediately called the AIDS hotline.
They probably spent a good half an hour on the phone with me in ironing out my misconceptions, because I didn't have a very good understanding of AIDS transmission. I was trying to convince them that you had to have sex with somebody for a very long time before you could get AIDS. Mainly back in '86, the media always told you that it was gay white men.
The media are still bombarding the public with mixed messages about AIDS.
It's fatal, it's growing, and there's no cure. AIDS is still the plague of the 80s. But tonight, in part 2 of AIDS and You, a few reminders of the facts as AIDS affects the average American who's not gay and doesn't use drugs. Last night, we gave statistics from the Center for Disease Control showing if you have sexual contact with a stranger, your chance of contracting AIDS is 1 in 5 million.
With some experts telling women, don't worry, the AIDS scare is over. To sex gurus Masters and Johnson, warning that AIDS will run rampant among heterosexuals. 9 years after AIDS first made news, people are still confused about just who is at risk of catching it.
You know, nobody's above it, I don't think, but I think I'm in a really low-risk group, not being a drug user or a homosexual.
Just being careless when you don't protect yourself and you know that there is a disease out here.
I could be at risk. I think everybody is that's not in a relationship for a long time.
I think you get the fear of even going into the hospital nowadays for an operation because you don't know if the blood's going to be contaminated.
At first it was reported that AIDS infected only gay white men. Then the virus moved to IV drug users and infected heterosexual men, women, and children. With over 87,000 cases of people infected with AIDS since 1981, the District of Columbia has the 6th highest population of people with AIDS in a metropolitan area. By 1993, that number will more than triple. Whether you are young, old, white, black, poor, rich, gay, or straight, AIDS does not discriminate.
I think it's important that man or woman take the responsibility for their actions, and if they're going to engage in sex, that they use a condom. Their partner may have slept with somebody a month before who may have been sleeping with an IV drug user, but they have no idea. Dealing with everybody now that individual has dealt with. If you're doing something that's risky and you test negative, thank the graces of God, and you'd better be acting more responsible in the future.
For Kathy, her future includes working in community outreach for the Whitman Walker Clinic. Even with her public profile, Kathy did not want to reveal her identity for this program.
There's a lot of people I haven't told, and I don't want to hurt my family. My family would be, they haven't told any of their friends. I wish that they could come out publicly and say that I was sick and that they're concerned and share that with their friends and not run the risk of ostracism. You know, I mean, if I had cancer, all their friends would be so supportive. But I don't have cancer, I have AIDS.
I suspect that some of you are saying, no, she can't have AIDS, or, well, maybe she's heterosexual and she got AIDS, but it could absolutely never happen to me. Or maybe, even more important, you're saying, now, tell me again, how is it that I get AIDS? Can I get it from shaking hands with someone? Does it require anal intercourse? Which we are going to say some words, by the way, that we certainly hope will not offend those of you at home. I know that a lot of you watching right now will have questions about this, so please give us a call at 703-845-9797. And I'd like to go to Dr. Daniel Hoth right now and ask him to clear something up for us. We saw a little piece in there of Maury Povich citing some statistics. I believe it was 1 in 5 million people, and we can't even trust the media because apparently these figures are wrong. And let me first tell people that Dr. Hoth is director of the AIDS programs for the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is part of the National Institute of Health. Dr. Hoth?
Right. Well, then, of course, there are 3 ways that you can get AIDS. Through unprotected sex, either vaginal or anal, through contact with infected blood, which is most commonly, as the clip showed, through intravenous drug users sharing needles or mixing blood, and thirdly, through mothers passing it to their children, and we'll talk more about that later. But with regard to sexual transmission, the Maury Povich's segment was simply wrong. It's misleading. If you look across the nation and you dilute it out completely, sure, the rate is very low. But studies show that the chances of getting AIDS or HIV infection from a person who's infected can be from as little as 1 contact to as many as several hundred. We simply can't predict.
Jim Graham is nodding. Before we go to the audience, you have a comment you'd like to
Well, no, I think I would agree. I think the one thing I would add, though, is that this message does not seem to have gotten across in terms of heterosexuals. I mean, it seems to me that we're running an incredible risks right now in the heterosexual community, which has chosen year after year after year to ignore these messages, to ignore the experience not only in other countries, but also the experience of groups within our own country.
Well, let's ask this audience. I mean, do you agree with what's said? Do you feel that for those people here who are heterosexual, that you don't pay enough attention? You think that it can't happen to you? You know, what is your experience? I see 2 hands. And excuse me, I'm going through here again, the shortest distance between 2 points. Stay with me. Please, sir, stand.
Hi, I'm Alex Compagnet from Salud Incorporated. I just want to make a comment. Everything I saw till this point in all this program, you know, I feel that Latino community that represent almost 10% of the population in metropolitan area, and we pay 10% of the taxes. We are still not represented, even here. Okay?
But you are, can we say that you are representing, and I think that's reasonable. Hang on. We are going to talk about how it affects
okay, I'm really, you know, appreciate, you know, and I respect all the people in the panel and in the audience, but I just want to bring that point, you know, that we are a median age Latinos in this area of 20-year-old, so we are really at risk. Also, we have the language problem, and we have all the other problems that we share in common with all the majority. We can say we are also minority here.
Those are important issues, and I promise you we are going to deal with how AIDS is affecting the Black and Hispanic community in just a few minutes.
Thank you very much.
But let's stay with the topic of the moment, which is, as heterosexuals, whether we are not paying enough attention. And I did see a couple of hands back here. I'm going to the rafters, gentlemen. Please stand. And of course, some of us will recognize you. Hi, David. How are you? Glad you could be with us.
Thank you. I was down on a college campus about 3 weeks ago, and there's 1,100 kids on the campus, and there were 69 cases of chlamydia, and all the girls said, well, he said he was negative, and I'm negative, so, and I said, well, great, now you have chlamydia to deal with, and that's just one of the STDs that was running around campus, and I go to campus after campus, and I find the same thing. When I was in Ohio, there were the same rampant STDs running around, and the kids are just like, well, you know, I mean, he said he was negative.
So they're not paying close attention.
They're not paying attention, and the message is not getting across.
Yes. Let me ask this lady to comment.
I'm the mother of 3 college students, and I agree with David. I think that colleges are not doing the job with respect to AIDS education, and college students are not paying attention to the danger.
I would like to introduce another one of our panelists, Larry Ellis. And Larry is president and co-founder of LifeLink, which is a support group for people with AIDS. And I'm curious to know what you think of the proceedings so far and what you think about high-risk groups, low-risk groups, and if we're maybe even not using the correct terminology here.
Well, Lynn, you're not using the right terminology, and LifeLink is not a support group for people with AIDS. LifeLink is terribly understood, especially by my colleagues Jim Graham and Reed Tuckson, who think that all we do is supply people with AIDS to do Speakers Bureau. What we have done
straighten it out.
and do is get Social Security, Medicaid, food stamps, when we had a housing assistance program in the district, to over 150 people with AIDS since January of 1988, but that is never mentioned. We are perceived as being some kind of helpless, hapless victims, and most of the time we're straightening out the mess created by other service providers for people with AIDS who were either poorly served, refused service, or confused in their service and got
Larry,
to
let me ask you to hold that point because we will come back to those issues in just a few minutes. But it's really important right now that we clarify and stay with the main subject here, which is who is at risk and how clearly we understand that. Dr. Hope?
I think one comment I'd like to make in follow-up to the first segment as well as the last one, and that is that epidemiologic data shows that AIDS or HIV infection among adolescents is the most rapidly growing group. So, and this is particularly troublesome. I think I'm the parent of 3 teenagers and I'm very concerned about whether teenagers are really believing the message. They hear it, many of them, they intellectually understand it, but they don't behave it.
Dr. Tuckson is the perfect person to respond to this. I've seen you in public service announcements, and I admire what you do, but I have to tell you, I wonder if anybody who needs to hear is paying attention.
Well, the public service announcement I think you're referring to is one that advises young people about the important role of abstinence. When I filmed that commercial, it was done in an environment with young people, and I asked them very clearly, the people that participated, would this make a difference? If by saying no, will we encourage more youngsters to, in fact, not be sexually active and to do the right thing? The answer very clearly was they didn't think it was going to work either. We still have a responsibility to try. Adults have to give young people the message that will save their lives, and it's appropriate. However, having done that, we also have to realize that sexually transmitted diseases are now on the increase, and very dramatically, and among our young people especially, which lets us know that despite all the information, all the education, and all the cajoling that we have done, sexual activity continues to occur. And as such, at a minimum, at an absolute minimum, we've got to let them understand the consequences of their behavior, and secondly, encourage them that if they're not going to take our advice, to at least wear a condom.
Are you optimistic?
I have the responsibility.
Really, are you optimistic?
I have the responsibility to be optimistic, to continue to work, and be enthusiastic.
Well, that I think is a realistic
That's my job.
answer. Let's say good evening to Marion in Seat Pleasant. How are you this evening?
Fine, thank you. One comment I'd like to make is, why do most programs zero in on homosexuals in the beginning of their program? This certainly scares away the straight, quote unquote, the married, single couples, etc. They actually feel as though they're the ones that are not at risk. We're all at risk. AIDS is such a link and a chain. We don't know where we're going. We don't know where we have been in terms of any type of sexual contact that we've had. As you know, we're in a drug war now, and of course, drugs play a major part in the AIDS situation. We're scaring our youth away, and we have many things that we have got to address in order to make everybody feel that they're at risk. The Whitman Clinic is represented there. Take time out and go to the Whitman Clinic, volunteer some service, and contact Love in Action. Take time out to do these things, and it'll certainly be a help.
I certainly hope you are a parent, because if you are, your children are fortunate, because I know you're giving them the correct information. What do you think? How would you like to have this done? How would you like to get the information? All right, right here, please.
I'd like to see major targeted campaigns put on by our city government. I'd like to ask Dr. Tuckson why 8 years into this epidemic there is still not a major education campaign in the city, and specifically one directed at gay men black gay men who account for 80% of the caseload in the city. And this year he only asked for $100,000 to target black gay men in education, and even the city council said that was a ridiculously low amount.
I think this is the anti-D2 government section up here.
I think that first of all, the information is incorrect. The premise of the question is wrong. There is a very important and very vigorous and very vital education program that is first of all for people who are gay, done by the Whitman Walker Clinic and many others. In terms of black gay constituency, that has been an area that we have spent a great deal of time in trying to help the black gay community come together so that it can help us to exercise that responsibility. It is not possible for the Health Commission to educate the black gay community by just saying we want to do it. The community has to be organized in a way to allow us to do that. we are very pleased with the progress that the black gay community has made in terms of organizing itself. And finally, in terms of the general public, that we are very dependent on the media. And to be very frank with you, we have developed the kinds of public service announcements and campaigns. There was some shown in one of the earlier clips. We are having a very difficult time, though, getting this community's media and major outlets to permit us to use the word condom and to show a picture of a condom. That is not something that we can do by ourselves. And the last thing is, in terms of the budget and the amount of money, that is a function simply of what money is available in this government to be able to spend. And while many of us may have been concerned that it was low, that was the maximum that I could get us to be able to do, given all the other things in the financial situation of the District of Columbia.
Okay, you raised several good points. One of them is about explicit language. And I think there are still a lot of issues around what people are willing to hear. Would you stand, please?
Yes. I'd like to pick up on that. Not only does the language in terms of how we want to get this information need to be explicit, and I couldn't agree more with that, it also needs to be culturally specific and ethnically specific. You cannot have an upper-class white woman walking into a black ghetto neighborhood and trying to communicate a message about AIDS to those individuals. That needs to come from within their own community. It needs to be the kind of message that can penetrate cultural barriers, ethnic barriers, that sort of thing. And secondly, I think that if we can leave this audience with one message tonight, we keep talking about IV drug users, homosexuals, etc., and society has had a tendency to label people with AIDS. Anyone can be exposed
as
to.
we've seen.
Right.
Yeah.
And the real message should be, it is not who you are, it is what you do. AIDS is preventable by behavioral change.
Right.
And behavioral change takes place through this kind of specific targeted education.
Let's say good evening to Tony in Hagerstown. Good evening, Hagerstown.
Hello, yeah. I have been diagnosed of having AIDS, and my wife has been diagnosed of having the virus. And she wants to know if there's any way that someone can help her to get psychological help in dealing with the fact that I'm going to die and how to raise our 3 children.
All right, Tony, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Bill McCormick to respond to that, and then perhaps Dr. Host could.
We have programs in Montgomery County for support groups for families with AIDS. We have groups, Concerned Others. We have AIDS patients, HIV patients. He's in Hagerstown, which would probably be closer to Baltimore, where there is a program in Baltimore called AIDS Action. That group could direct him to group meetings of families and direct him to the areas where he'd have to go to.
We should tell Tony and anyone else who's listening that we will offer some telephone numbers at the end of the program, so I'm sure there are a lot of people on the line who can't get through who have the same question Tony does, so stand by for those numbers, and if you can get somebody to grab a pencil for you, that might be a good thing.
I'd like to also say something
real quick. Yeah.
On the education aspect. And Montgomery County does educate their students on AIDS. They also work with HERO, an organization, Health Education Resource Organization, which they in turn are used as a backup for education in the school systems. The school systems will contact HERO, and representatives will go in and speak with the teachers, train the teachers. They'll also have a patient like myself or someone else who has AIDS to come in and talk to the students. Surprisingly enough, we have...
I'm going to have to stop you.
Okay.
You were going great there, and you did give us some terrific information, but we are going to have to go on because it's important that we tell you that many people with AIDS are in danger of losing their homes and are also in critical need of drug treatment. Now, here's the story of 2 people and their struggle to survive.
You make such a mess. Where do you go with that stuff?
It's lunchtime at Grandma's house, a community home for babies infected with the AIDS virus. But one child is too ill to eat. Annie is nearly 2 years old and has never received the drug AZT. Doctors have said that without it, she could die within 6 months. Debbie Tate is president of Grandma's house.
The baby came to us in poor health. And she gained a lot of milestones while being here at Grandma's house, crawling, trying to pull up. And now the baby is sort of a lot of those milestones that she had gained naturally. She's losing them now because she's much sicker now. And her health is really failing now. And she's a very sick baby. And
For many people with AIDS, access to drug treatment could mean the difference between life or death. But many potential life-saving drugs are unavailable except for people in experimental drug programs.
Of the 10 of us that were doing the first interleukin-2 experiment, there are only 2 of us left. And of the people that were doing the second, there aren't many more than that left. And for
Joel has been a participant in experimental drug programs at the National Institute of Health since 1984. Under the guidance of Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of AIDS research at NIH, Joel became one of the first to receive the drug AZT.
Joel is at the point where he's stabilized at a certain level. He has an abnormal immune function, but it isn't progressively deteriorating. And what our hope is that by putting him on these clinical protocols, we'll be able to maintain the stability of his immune system, or hopefully even better, to increase it to the point where he starts to get back to normal. Now, if that occurs, then he would be even more protected from opportunistic infection.
Which seems like that's what's happened, because since I've been on the AZT, my immune profile has gone up. Initially, there seemed to be some success in the fact that my counts were all right. Some of my lesions started to fade. And then I went on a combined protocol of one of the interferons with AZT. And that ultimately was very disastrous. Sometimes when I'm not feeling well, or when I've been hospitalized because of illness, I begin to wonder if it wouldn't be better to take this millstone off my neck and just die. And of course that means that I'm pretty depressed at that time. But for the most part, yes, I'd say I'm not a little lucky, I'd say I'm extremely lucky.
Annie and other children with AIDS have not been as lucky. They are rarely allowed to try drugs that are regularly prescribed for adults. And because of potential toxic side effects, doctors have been reluctant to include children in drug experiments. Meanwhile, the number of children dying from AIDS continues to rise. Of the nearly 1,500 children with AIDS, more than half are black. They are part of the growing crisis of AIDS in the black and Hispanic communities. In Washington, the majority of new AIDS cases are black. With a growing drug epidemic in this area, the AIDS crisis has the potential to explode. Out of 200 infected babies in the district, 1 in 10 are in need of a home.
Until Grandma's house, there was no place for these babies to go except in hospitals.
Debbie Tate founded Grandma's House just over a year ago. Funded by the district government, it provides comprehensive care for 4 children. It is the only one of its kind in the area.
The level of care that we have, the touching, the holding, the hugging, and this is real, you know, it's really real. That these babies are just like any other babies, you know, they're just babies, and the main thing that they need is just a lot, I mean a whole bunch of love. They soak it up like little sponges. They need it.
Housing is critical for many people living with AIDS. Like Annie, Joel was in need of a home.
I had lost my housing when I lost my job. I was living in an uninsulated attic. It got pretty cold in the wintertime. And I don't have the money myself for my own apartment, my own living space. If it weren't for this house, I have no idea where I'd be.
For Joel, home was a gift from the Whitman Walker Clinic. Whitman Walker provides housing for 41 people living with AIDS. Following the loss of a job, home, and means of support, many people with AIDS are dependent on the community. But that support is fragmented, and some segments of the community have been reluctant to deal with the difficult issues associated with AIDS.
Early on, there was not that kind of sensitivity to the crises coming from the faith community that I would have liked to have seen.
Confronting AIDS often means dealing with sexuality, a topic many find difficult to accept, even some people with AIDS.
A couple of the people who have died in this house were black and denied that they were gay and denied that they had AIDS up until they died.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm serious.
How could they not deny that they have gay?
Because culturally it was not accepted to be black and gay.
They told you that?
Uh-huh. But that's more or less common knowledge.
We fear that which we do not understand, even when we deal with different races or population of people. The fear is because of the lack of knowledge. And I think the more education that we have, the more that we use the word condom, that we use the word AIDS, that we talk about these things, and that education needs to be infiltrated, not just in one system, but throughout. It has to be more comprehensive in the church, in the homes, in the schools, civic organizations, everywhere.
Until all segments of the community begin to deal with AIDS and the issues that surround it, the responsibility for caring will fall to people like Debbie Tate. She hopes that one day the children of Grandma's house will find a permanent home.
The only way we want to lose our babies, and we don't call it a loss then, is that they go to a home that's better than Grandma's house. And if they can go to a better environment than Grandma's house, we welcome that. A loving home and environment where they can have that kind of one-on-one care that they so much deserve.
On February 21st, Annie died from complications due to AIDS.
One of the issues with Annie's death, as you learned in the piece about her, is drug therapy. Annie, of course, as you heard, did not have AZT, while many other sufferers are able to take it. Dr. Daniel Hoth is going to explain to us, because it is really very confusing, to try to understand why some people are able to have this drug and a few others and others cannot. Dr. Hoth, of course, NIH has come in for a lot of criticism, as has the FDA. What really is the problem with giving AZT to a baby, and why can't some people take it?
Well, of course, the key question that any physician wants to know is, does AZT benefit a baby with HIV infection? And recent studies conducted at the NIH and the clinical center there have shown a very large benefit to these babies with AZT. And now we're assembling that data, and the company that makes the drug, Burroughs Wellcome, is intending to take that information to the FDA for approval. The important...
Which will take how long? Though one of the issues is that what has it been?
Right.
8 years?
Let me just comment. Sure. Very good question. The one comment I'd make, though, is the fact that AZT is on the market, and so any physician, any pediatrician can prescribe it. So that the AZT is expensive. It's too expensive.
Now, were there not funds just allocated under the Bush administration that would allow more people to be subsidized who are taking?
That's correct. There was a continuation of a program to provide AZT to people who cannot afford it. I think what's important...
Question, hand, stand up. There is a microphone near you if you want to pop up and say something. Who was that? Hop up, and there's a microphone right behind you.
Hi, yes. We're 9 years into this epidemic, and NIH still systematically excludes people of color and women from most drug trials. This situation has changed slightly in the last year. One of the drug trials that recently does allow children is a particularly cruel and gruesome one involving a gamma globulin, a double-blind placebo study in which infants are injected either with a placebo or the gamma globulin. This is one of the only drug trials available for children with AIDS. I was wondering, I had asked the doctors, how long will this situation go on? This is 9 years into this. You're talking AZT. There are several other drugs that are going on, other drug trials, yet you're talking, well, we're assembling data now. Perhaps soon we will get some children into drug trials.
No, that isn't what I said. Actually, there's been a lot of progress, and what is very exciting to us is the fact there are now more than half a dozen trials available around the country for children or infants who have AIDS, or HIV infection. So the trial that you spoke of is an important study, but that's an older study. There are now other trials testing other drugs. The other thing that I think it's important for the audience to recognize is, yes, I mentioned AZT because that's the most established drug, but the good news, I believe, is that the research community is now developing many, many drugs. The pipeline of research is about to produce many drugs. There are more than 40 drugs for AIDS now in clinical testing.
The drug issue is one that unfortunately we really could devote a whole program to because there are so many facets of it. There's another aspect of this piece that it's really important to bring out because we spoke to the gentleman who mentioned the concerns of the Hispanic community, and I don't know whether I saw Larry Ellis grimace when our person in this piece, Joel, talked about the denial in the black community among homosexuals who say, no, 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 it was drugs. Did I see a response to that?
Yes, you did. I've known Joe for a long time, and on that issue, he simply doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and he really should stop making comments like that. This has been going on for over an hour, and I'm glad to see it finally turning to a focus of service to people who have AIDS now. I'm not against education prevention. I don't want anyone in this room who's not infected to get infected. You need this information. But I have AIDS. A lot of other people in this country have AIDS. They're being discharged out of hospitals tonight as we speak onto benches in front of the hospital with no place to live. I've had them on my sleep sofa because they had no place to live. I've been in the LifeLink office until midnight filling out Social Security applications because we're trying to get some kind of income.
Let's talk.
I am not against education prevention,
No,
but my issue
well
is services to people with AIDS.
Let's talk about another aspect of that service, and I'd like to ask this nice young woman to stand because we had talked a little bit earlier about what churches are doing or are not doing. Services can mean a lot of different things, and sometimes it can mean loving support. How can you tell us about black churches? What can you tell us about black churches in the Washington area in the response to AIDS? There has been some criticism.
Well, I can't tell you about all of the black churches.
Of course not. Nor will I expect
area.
you to.
I'm here really on behalf of the Ebenezer AME Church. It's in Fort Washington, Maryland. And I can speak specifically for that church. And I think working in the district, coming in contact with some other persons who have, the churches really are not doing enough in the churches. And I think many of them are turning their head. And there are some, though, that are trying. Don't get me wrong. I know within our own church, we have a medical unit in the church, and in the beginning perhaps there was some hesitancy in terms of what can we tell the children. We have about 500 children.
But you feel kids they're coming around.
They're coming around. I think the audience is beginning to come around. Our minister certainly is coming around, and we're beginning to get the word out. And I think that much more needs to be done.
Let's find out what William from here in Washington has to say. Good evening, William. Are you there?
Good evening. Yes, my question or my comment first of all is the fact that out of the 80,000 some people who have AIDS across the country, over 30% of them are black. Yet we only represent 12% of the United States population. I'm sure those figures are consistent or even more in the Washington area. My comment specifically is, what is the D.C. government doing to impact the black community in terms of prevention, and not only in terms of prevention, but what Larry was talking about in terms of services to black persons with AIDS and those who are in those risk categories. I know that many services are provided by organizations that are predominantly white, focused in the white gay community, etc. And like many people have said, this has been going on for 8 years now.
Let's go to Dr. Reed. Poor Dr. Tuxen. We have to come to you on this one, and then I'd like to hear from Jim Graham.
I'm happy to have that opportunity to discuss it. First of all, the premise of the question is absolutely correct, that in the District of Columbia, 55% of the cases are in people who are of color. That's very important. What that means in giving the demographics of D.C., educating the black community in the District of Columbia is essentially educating the District of Columbia. We are out at every civic association, church group that we can go to, health fairs, housing developments. We're at every place that you can be. Our general media campaign, which again, I think we have to really put a lot of emphasis on, trying to encourage the metro system to allow them to run our ads and our commercials, allowing the TV stations and the radio stations. We've been begging them.
But Dr.
We need to get that
Tuxen,
done.
don't you still essentially reach a middle-class audience
Well, let me
that
continue,
is going
because
to pay
I think
attention?
it's important.
All right.
Then the IV drug abusing community, we have an extraordinarily dedicated team of 20-some people who are out every day, where people are abusing drugs in those neighborhoods that are high opportunities for that kind of behavior, people that are prostitutes. We're workers on the streets working with them right now, tonight, handing out not only education but bleach and condoms. And so there's very specific and very targeted education efforts there. Regarding the service delivery side of it, that's an important area that we have to do a lot more on. And certainly we have had excellent experiences by the gay white male community in particular, and the Whitman Walker organization and people like that, who have really done well. But now we're starting to see people of color organizing as well. Government has got to do a better job of facilitating and letting those programs grow that are similar in the black community.
But now, Larry, do you feel, as someone who doesn't have a direct connection with Whitman Walker, that they do enough for the minority community?
Well,
I realize
that
it's a
depends on
loaded
who you
question.
talk to. That really depends on who you talk to. We get a lot of people dumped on us who are people of color from Whitman Walker Clinic for a variety of reasons. And I think some of the reasons included are because of racism in the Whitman Walker Clinic. Some of the reasons are sexism in the Whitman Walker Clinic. Some of the reasons are elitism and snobism and bureaucratism in the Whitman Walker Clinic. Now, I am not saying that Jim sits at his desk and writes all kinds of dictatorial, anti-human policy. I am saying that the fact is that LifeLink runs into people who have run into this in Whitman Walker Clinic.
Let's give Jim a chance to
and
respond.
not just black, but white as well.
Right. Jim Graham?
Well, this show has been a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be.
I don't know whether that's good or bad.
Having been over the years, I've been involved in this epidemic since the first days it was recognized in Washington, D.C. I've just passed the 5-year mark of being a full-time administrator of the Whitman Walker Clinic. So, you know, and I've been in a lot of TV shows, but this certainly is perhaps a turning point locally for some of the comments that are being made. I want to avoid divisiveness, you know, and I want to stay with the facts. And the facts of the matter are the Whitman Walker Clinic currently serves 650 persons with AIDS or persons with late ARC, as it's called. 40% of those people are people of color. 40% of our staff are people of color. 40% of our staff are women. I would go so far as to say, in terms of nonprofit organizations in the D.C. area, Whitman Walker is among the most integrated in terms of gender and race. And that's a record that I'm very proud of. Now, let me just add, since others have spoken, you know, that one of the things that you hear, which is a lingering issue, is the roots of the Whitman Walker Clinic. And I'm very proud of where the clinic came from. It came from the gay and lesbian community, and we have never been shy about that orientation, unlike some other AIDS organizations. We're proud of that root. But we have worked very, very hard to make our services, which are very substantial services, available to anyone who needs them. And I'd be happy to hear any specific cases that Mr. Ellis may have. But I think that point really must not be lost.
With a list.
In fairness to moving on, we can do that otherwise. We have a woman here who'd like to respond, and the microphone's right behind you. We'll pick you up.
Whitman Walker certainly has taken the lead in AIDS education in the city, and for that I thank you. However, you cannot be all things to all people, and people of color have specific needs, both black and Hispanics, and women have specific needs. And I think some of the programs that come out of Whitman Walker and some of the assistance has the gay and lesbian spin to it, and therefore it doesn't reach the people, certain target groups, the way it might. Another comment I'd like to make is the clip that we saw with Annie, the young baby. I have seen that situation repeated over and over again, and it bothers me.
What
somehow
situation?
With babies and showing them as the helpless victim. And somehow it's more palatable to our society to see an infant infected with AIDS. And you can say, oh, poor Annie, and that's true. But then what do you say about the people who are the IV drug users, the people who are heterosexual and contract this disease, the people who are gay and get this disease? What's wrong with them? You know, they are human beings too. So we have got to start looking at this as a problem for all of us.
The fact is, I suspect that there are still many people who say they got what they deserved, and I think that's one of the things that we're still fighting.
You brought up a little bit earlier the church's response in Maryland, Virginia, and the district. I work with Love and Action, which is an education-based organization in church education as well as in Christian ministry to people with AIDS. I think that if Jesus Christ were physically in Washington, D.C. tonight, and we went looking for him, We wouldn't go to any church to find Jesus. We'd probably find him sitting by the fountain in the middle of DuPont Circle. And Jesus would be reaching out to Bob and Bill and Sue in the middle of the gay district, and he'd be saying, I love you guys so very, very much. There's hope. There's hope for us all. Come and follow me. Now, Jesus Christ is not physically here, but the body of Christ, the church, is here.
That's a loving comment, and I think
the
that a lot of
church
people
needs to
appreciate
behave
that.
as Jesus would behave, and that is to be an open refuge for anyone who's afflicted by AIDS to come in and open up and say, here I am, I need help. And then the church would respond to them as Jesus would respond.
Thank you very much. Let's go to William here in Washington, or I should say across the river there in Washington. Thank you very much for waiting. John, thank you. John?
Yeah, I have been kicked out of a church because I said I was gay, and I said that I had AIDS, and they told me not to get communion because I was going to be touching the elements. I have gone to other churches and said the same thing in trying to be honest, and they told me to leave. Now, all these words are fine and good, but until they get put into action, it don't mean nothing to me.
Real quick comment, and then I want to talk to this
I'm
gentleman.
a pastor of a church, and I would just like to say to the gentleman that called, he can call us. He's welcome in our church.
Thank you very much, sir.
I would like to know why some churches say this is a punishment from God. I don't think God is punishing me. I think he loves me because I'm one of his children.
Well, let's hope there are some people out there in churches who hear what you're saying. Please, stand.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd like to address the issue of minorities again. And minorities have been primarily defined as blacks and Hispanics, but the Washington, D.C. area has nearly 500,000 foreign-born immigrants. Probably 50% or more are Hispanic immigrants. But there is very little coordinated effort to address the linguistic minorities, those non-English speaking immigrants. I'm with the Indo-Chinese Community Center, and we are now trying to begin to address this and coordinate a network of efforts. One of the major issues we're talking about now is the issue of mandatory HIV testing for people applying for immigration.
Ah, yeah.
We're trying now to educate those people who need to apply for immigration that waivers are available for them under certain conditions, and
I know it's hard to get it all out. And I know you can feel me pressing you for time, too. Let me say this, because I'm going to have to stop you and go on, which is the worst part of my job, and I hate it. I'm so glad you mentioned communities other than just the black and Hispanic as minority communities, because that is an area we do need to explore more, and I'm glad you're doing work in that area, and I thank you. In addition to struggling with the issues of drug treatment, housing, and community support, many people with AIDS also face discrimination in the workplace. Our final story tonight is John's.
Years ago, John wanted to be an actor, to touch people with his performance on stage or screen. But as often happens, dreams are put aside when reality takes center stage. So when John recently appeared at Washington Studio Theater, he had to leave his hospital bed to do so. He was there to accept a grant on behalf of the New Day Wellness Coalition, a support group for people with AIDS.
This new coalition of people with AIDS in Southern Maryland provides a speakers bureau, information and referral, hospital visits, and a wellness group for people affected by HIV and AIDS in Prince George's, Calvert, Charles, and St. Mary's County. Partnership support to this important new group will enable them to get started with a number of startup activities. And we're very pleased that you were able to be with us here today, John.
When you're infected with HIV sickness, you completely lose your perspective on your future, thinking that it's helpless, and there's not much you can do. But there are lots of things you can do during this kind of trying times.
Trying times for John began soon after he was diagnosed with AIDS.
I was working in a Hallmark gift store near the University of Maryland as manager. And there came a point where the owner of the store sold the chain of stores. And when the new owners took over, they discharged me.
John is suing Matthews Hallmark. He believes his firing was discrimination due to AIDS. John's attorney is Lisa Newell.
The explanation they're offering is that John was being paid too much by the previous owners. There's no doubt that they knew he had AIDS, and John was the only person in any of the 3 stores who was fired by the new owners, and he was not given the option of keeping his job at a lower salary. They just told him to get out.
The management of Matthews Hallmark refused to talk with WETA. However, according to their attorney, John was discharged for purely business reasons. He stated that John's store was mismanaged and that his salary was too high to keep him on considering the volume of business.
Top of my head blew off. Here I am sick, now I have no job, you know, and it was really upsetting. And so my first reaction wasn't to ask why or whatever. You know, I didn't even think about it. You know, I was just so stunned. I just walked out the door.
John turned to his friends and family for support.
When he got fired, he was devastated, and we were too.
Frank is John's brother-in-law.
It was just another one of those things that happens when people find out that they are HIV positive or that they do have AIDS. And the people who did it obviously had no idea to realize how it would affect John or how it would affect, you know, the rest of his family.
I had no idea of the ultimate, things that were going to happen because of that day. I lost my insurance, had to go through social services for help with my medication. It was a very difficult adjustment.
When Matthews Hallmark took over, they fired him the first day, and he did work part of that first day. Had been asked to work that first day by the new owners, but they have taken the position that he was never their employee and therefore did not inform him of his COBRA rights.
The Federal Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, otherwise known as COBRA, was enacted to protect employees and their dependents from losing health insurance if they lose their job. If you are terminated from your job, it is up to the employer to notify you of your COBRA rights. You must be allowed to continue your health insurance for the next 18 months on that company's policy, but you will have to pay the entire premium yourself. The potential loss of health insurance following the loss of a job poses a real threat to people with AIDS. The high cost of AIDS-related health care is almost always beyond an individual's ability to pay. Without health insurance, those with AIDS are faced with possible impoverishment and a dependency on government assistance programs such as Medicaid. John now relies on Medicaid and his family for support. Matthews Hallmark offered to settle the suit with 2 months back pay. John refused.
We need the money. We could have took the small amount that they offered, but we may need more. You know, the way John's kicking his heels up today, we're going to have to, we're going to need a lot of money to take care of him. And I don't think that John should pay for what he can by himself, and he deserves everything that he should have gotten from the company by work. And obviously by letting him go, they've put him in a situation that, you know, so much depends on what others can do. And these people owe that to him.
We could probably settle cheap. He doesn't want to. He wants to make a point. He wants to educate the public. He wants to see some justice done.
Well, it's so easy when you get sick to just sit down and say, oh, I'm sick. Where if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that you really have the spirit and the will to do something. And once you find that, you can really Father, you can do something and get involved. And that's what keeps you going.
Since this piece was completed, John has settled with Matthews Hallmark. According to their agreement, however, the terms cannot be disclosed. John has left the hospital and he is now at home. Would like to introduce you to two new panelists who've joined us. First, John Bunker, who is Director of Special Health Initiatives for Circle Incorporated, and Robert Waldron, who is National Spokesperson for the Health Insurance Association of America and the American Council of Life Insurance. And with that title, you will bear with me while I ask you a question so that I can understand one of the most complicated things for me. Apparently, there was a congressional survey that found that 1/3 of all insurance companies consider sexual preference. Now, is that not illegal to consider sexual preference in offering insurance to someone?
Yeah, it's illegal in 37 states. We've supported the regulation and the legislation that would make that illegal. It was 1/3 of the companies they surveyed. I believe they surveyed 60 companies. And all I can say is 2/3 of them don't. And I wish it were 100% of them.
Well, how can those who do, again, discriminate against individuals in insurance, how are they able to get away with it? What kinds of information do they ask for? Because apparently they can't ask for your sexual preference, can they?
They can't ask for your sexual preference. They can't ask for any surrogate for sexual preference. For example, what kind of a job you have, or where in what neighborhood you might live, or whether you were married or living with
How do they do
with a single male. So I don't know. What they did was they asked the underwriters, do you consider sexual preference? And the underwriters are home office types of people, so they're not the ones that are asking the questions. And I don't know how they would get the information legally in those 37 states where it's against the law, and I don't know how they have the nerve to ask it in states where it isn't against the law.
Let's talk about something I think we all think about when we talk about AIDS and then use the word insurance in the same breath, and that is how much it really costs to take care of an AIDS patient, because I think a lot of people think it's much more than it is.
Well, it's going to vary. It's going to vary by geographical area. It depends upon what kind of infrastructure is available. Kaiser Permanente, for example, on the West Coast, they've recently done a survey. They feel they can treat an AIDS patient for the course of the illness for $37,000. That's terrific. That's a cost that we would hope that everybody could possibly emulate. On the East Coast, it's more expensive because more often than not, acute care facilities are being used where other types of facilities are not available.
Let's find out what our audience thinks about the insurance issue. First of all, how many of you would be willing to pay higher premiums if you knew that it would relieve the medical burden for AIDS patients? I had a feeling this audience would go that way. How would you feel about having a hospice or some other caretaking facility in your neighborhood? Is there anyone who feels that that is not something you could deal with? See, I think that one of the things we have to understand about this audience is that you may be atypical. And I think that in fairness, we should say that. Let me ask you another couple of questions, and then I want John Bunker to help us out here. Tell me about your workplace. How many of you know whether there's an AIDS policy in your workplace? All right, you're too good. John Bunker, not everybody is this smart. Not everybody is this well-informed. Not everyone is this aware. Now, you help with AIDS education in the workplace. What are you finding?
Well, there's been several national surveys, and they all indicate that only between 5 and 10% of companies actually have a policy in place. The majority of those companies are large companies. Very few small and medium-sized businesses actually have a AIDS policy in place. And even fewer of those companies have established an AIDS education program for employees.
What do we need to help people in the workplace understand about AIDS people who are working with them? What are the greatest fears?
I think the greatest anxiety in most national surveys would indicate that it's fear of contagion and transmission in the workplace. I think with an appropriate policy that's in place, with a well-designed educational program and with supervisors who are trained in dealing with the issue, I think you can avoid a lot of that anxiety and misinformation in the workplace.
We are rapidly coming to the end of our time this evening. We do know that there are a lot of you on hold there. Let's try to take a few telephone calls. Good evening. Your question, please.
Yes, this is Chris Gentry.
Yes.
And I'd like to know why there hasn't been more protective of the public interest legislation that when people are newly dating and you're confronted with the sexual part of dating and people promising to give you a life, that we realize they're other human beings and the person is being psychologically tricking to other people in our society that we don't change a law to making people not wanting to talk about AIDS or wearing condoms a police responding type situation to protect us.
I'm not sure. Do I understand the question correctly? Is there someone here on the panel who understands the question well enough to respond to it? I'm not sure that I do.
I think she could get an excellent answer from Dannenmeyer or Jesse Helms.
A little bit confusing that. Go ahead. Someone
But
wanted
let
to
me be very clear. I think that the information is, and what the audience has to take home is, regardless of what the other person does, you have a responsibility to protect yourself, your health. Don't leave it up to somebody else.
Which raises a question of being able to trust people to tell you the truth.
I'm Lynn Ricka, and I work for Sasha Bruce Youth Work in the district with adolescents. We are finding ourselves needing foster homes for black adolescents. We work with black adolescents who either would be in the court system or homeless, and we need foster homes. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to talk to me after this, or anybody watching at home, please, Sasha Bruce Youth Work.
All right. Now, we only have about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to try to take some questions that have been delayed, and there are people I've promised. You have a message for Tony in Hagerstown. I have promised you that you would be able to give it someplace you can get help.
Very quickly, he should contact the Washington County Health Department, or he can call 1-800-342-AIDS, where he can get referral for psychological assistance.
Okay, that's for Tony. There's a gentleman up here who had a comment about heterosexuals and AIDS. Would you stand, please?
You asked earlier why it's difficult to reach young people. I think that part of the tragedy of the epidemic is we focused so much on AIDS and not on HIV. We've had to necessarily focus on AIDS, and we appreciate that work. But had we known in the 70s among the gay community that there was an epidemic there, we could have responded in some way. I don't think young people understand that HIV infection is the enemy and it's there, and until they quantitatively understand that, we'll have difficulty sending messages to them.
Thank you for your comment. Keep them short. I'll do as many as I can. We have about 3 minutes. Hi.
I'm Barry Forth from Fairfax Lesbian Gay Citizens Association. I just want to say that I think the biggest education campaign has to be directed to our elected officials particularly. For example, CARE Virginia had a wonderful lobby day in Richmond a few months ago, and I was appalled when a Fairfax delegate told me that she was concerned about the AIDS being spread through manicures. Now, this is a person who is representing Fairfax County, which is supposed to be a fairly well-educated district, telling me that she's upset about manicures. I think everyone, particularly in this room and people watching, should be in contact with their elected official, let them know what they think about what kind of laws should be dealing with the AIDS epidemic.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Yes, hi, I'm John Bates at the Direct Action Group Out. I think everything we've heard tonight underscores the need for our public officials to take the lead in not only educating people, but looking for more funds for AIDS-related services. Having said this, I would like to ask Dr. Tuxson how he, in good conscience, could have submitted his budget for AIDS for next year for the District of Columbia nearly 40% less than the amount that the District Council approved for last year.
All right, quick response to that.
The answer is very quickly is that it was a very difficult thing for us as a government to do. I'm the Commissioner of Public Health and part of a larger environment. The D.C. government, the budget deficit was $130 million. There were very painful decisions that had to be made. As the Health Commissioner, I have to put my budget in as part of that reality. I am very encouraged and very happy and very pleased that the City Council and the citizens of the city are willing to have a tax increase, which I, as a Health Commissioner, could not propose. That's not within my authority to do. But there's been a tax increase that will allow us to finance the increase. I don't think so that's the answer to it, and that's the reality in which I work, and I'm sorry that you're disappointed.
That you're allocated. Why did you divert funds last year to non-AIDS-related personnel costs from the AIDS budget that you were given?
The answer very quickly is...
Wait, give him a chance to answer.
We don't have the time, but the answer to your question is that there was a D.C. government budget deficit of $130 million. The Commission of Public Health exists within that reality. We have a federal law that says the D.C. government budget has to be balanced. That is a law. And as a result of that, there were decisions that were made, none of which I was comfortable with, none of which the mayor was comfortable with, but that is reality.
So the Office of AIDS activities is the most expendable.
Why can you get rid of that and not other programs? It makes no sense at all.
I would love to have him answer. Unfortunately, in his defense, I have to tell you that we are out of town too, in a way. Let me thank all of you for your wonderful questions and say to you that I think we've seen tonight that AIDS does not discriminate. It can affect our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, and ourselves. No matter who it strikes, AIDS affects our entire community. Now, if you would like more information on this issue, and we certainly hope that you do, WETA is providing a Living with AIDS resource kit. All you have to do is clip out the order form in today's Washington Post. It's on page D7, and there you see it. Or just jot down your request on a piece of paper, we don't care what it looks like, and then send it to AIDS Resource Kit, WETA TV, Post Office Box 2626, Washington, D.C. Our zip code is 20013. Or you can call 998-2829. Or is that 996? Okay. All right. 8s and 6s look alike sometimes. Do that during business hours. Now, if you need to talk with someone immediately, please call the AIDS hotline at 322-AIDS. After 10 p.m., you can call 1-800-342-AIDS, and someone will be there to take your call. They'll be there 24 hours a day. Now, I'd like to thank everyone who participated tonight here in the studio and at home. We thank you for your calls. We would like to close tonight's program with a message from the students of Ballou High School in Southeast Washington. For WETA, I'm Lynn May. Thank you. Good night.
I want to end it like this. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I tell you straight up, people, it hits home. It hits you hard and slow. You know you're done for. No rejoicing or praying. You know the score. I mean, you can have AIDS. You say you doubt it. You with AIDS. Think about it. I want to milk this subject like I would a cow. No ignorance needed. Just listen now. Can you catch the disease by just shaking hands, from toilet seats, from meats, from touching? No, you can. You should know shooting up. What do you harm? Dope and disease shooting right in your arm. I pack a Trojan like a Lucky Charm. So put your sex in check or else, Joe, you're gone. It can't be contained. It'll spread around. It's a problem, can't solve them. Let me break it down. You thrill for spill, you ill for feel, then try to chill. Man, write your will. Because it kills.
Human immunodeficiency virus. You have to take it. Highlight Osiris, BATP, and me will educate thee through the do's and don'ts of AIDS. No joke, no jest. It's time to test if you're like one of the rest. Who thinks the subject...
Funding for this program was made possible by the members of WETA, with additional funds provided by Craver Matthews Smith and Company, encouraging citizen awareness and action on important issues. Outreach activities are supported by a major grant from the Eugene and Agnes E. Meyer Foundation.